Okay, my YouTube people, why do we care about valve shimming? Stick around for this video, figure out how to shim your valves and why you need to. I am going to check the valve adjustment on this 2016 KTM 250 XCF. All the engines are the same on these, up to 22, so this covers a lot of years. And the first thing I do when I'm going to do this job, make sure to get a bucket of water, some spray 9, a toothbrush, and a wash brush. And then I proceed to scrub the top of the engine down. Now, as you can already see, I have the tank and the side plates off. That was pretty simple. Don't really feel the need to show how to get that off. But you can see I went all through here with the toothbrush and the scrub brush, and I scrubbed it as clean as could be. I think it's really important anytime before you're going to take the valve cover off or do any engine work, you don't want dirt falling down into the engine. So not only do I clean all around the gasket surfaces, I clean up above real good too, to make sure none of that can fall down in there. After it is, I get everything clean. I like to blow it off with air real good. You can see on the other side here, it's all nice and clean, just the same. So when I'm washing this, I make sure to wash the surface where the head meets the cylinder and then where the cylinder meets the block. Because when I go into this, I'm going to do a leak down check. And if it winds up having too much leak, I'm probably going to end up pulling the top end, do a piston and rings in it, and also check the valves a little further. But before you can do a leak down check, you have to take the cams out of this or make sure that they're shimmed properly in order to make sure that your valves are completely closed. One other thing while you're doing this, you have to pull the spark plug boot and make sure you blow into where the spark plug is with air real good and get out any dirt that could possibly be trapped in there, because you don't want that falling into anything. So I'll pull the boot and you can see with me what it looks like. As you see with me, there is some dirt down in on that boot. It's not extreme, but it is in there. And that's why I blow out the spark plug tube real good. When I go back together, I'm going to put dielectric grease around this lip here. And I'm also going to put dielectric grease up in the end where the spark plug goes. And hopefully that'll help seal it a little better. Now to take off the valve cover. These are 10 millimeter. Going to give it a tap with a plastic mallet. Doing my best not to damage it for sure. Oh yeah, didn't need much. To give me a little more clearance, I'm going to try and leave the gasket on the bottom half and just get the valve cover off. Get that connector out of the way. Should come off a lot easier. As you go, you want to wipe any dirt so you don't accidentally get dirt into it. This has a little bit of sealant or glue or something right here. Same with this one here. That dark area is some kind of sealant or glue. Right here you have a vent hose. You have to take this clamp off and then slide the hose off before the valve cover can come off. Now it's going to give the hose a little twist like that. Easy enough. Pull it to the side. I think I'm going to take this wire off and get it out of the way. I'm going to get the gasket the rest of the way off. Like that. And looks like it's about out there. Alright. Doesn't look like anything funky's going on in there. You can see the oil was just recently changed. Next thing you have to do is pull this plug out so that you can spin the engine over. So this winds up being 14 millimeters, and I don't have a 14 millimeter bolt head, so I'm sure as most people know, you can take 9/16 and 14 millimeter are the same size. And just do this. As you see, that wasn't tight at all. So I wound up putting it up on a bucket. I wound up putting the bike on a bucket to get it level so that oil doesn't drip out of here. Also, there's an O-ring here. I'm going to put the O-ring back onto the cover. Before this goes back on, I'm going to make sure I clean this lip real good because it's got some dirt there. To lock the flywheel in place, you have to take this Allen head screw out. There's a spacer on the back side of it. Then you put the screw back in. It locks the flywheels, but you don't want to lose that spacer. Next thing I'm going to do is turn this 14 millimeter nut until I get the timing marks lined up on the cams. You can see there's a white dot on that cam right there. As this one rotates down, this one's going to rotate up. First, I'll pull the gasket off. and now you can see they face one another, and that puts you at top dead center on the compression stroke. The important thing to remember is that the cams turn at half the speed of the crankshaft. If it seems that you have to turn the bolt on the flywheel a lot, that's because it might take up to 2 revolutions. And just to verify, you can see this cam lobe and that cam lobe are pointed up. That's the exhaust. And you can see the rear cam, which is the intake, is on the base circle. They're not pointed up, but they're close. So now that you have your engine in this state, you're locked at top dead center, you want to check the valve shimming to see where they're at. That way you can do the math to figure out what shim that you do need. The exhaust needs to be 5 to 7 thousandths. The intake needs to be 4 to 6 thousandths. I always try to set them on the upper end, so I'd like to see the exhaust at 7 and the intake at 6. You do have to figure out the exact size. I take my feeler gauges off of the pack of feeler gauges, and then I can stick them in real easy. All you do is you come down in here and you get in between the arm and the cam lobe. I'm going to check the exhaust. Here's 6. 6 is not going in. Here's 5. And 5 goes in. So I'm going to open that one up. When I shim it, I'm going to get a smaller shim to get that up to 7. Now, I already checked all these. This front one's at 7 over here on the left side. This one's at 5. The intake on the left side. The intake on the left side was at 2. And the intake on the right side was at 3,000. So after checking the shims on each one, I want the exhaust to be at 7,000. And I want the intake to be at 6,000. The specs on them are 5 to 7 for the exhaust and 3 to 6 for the intake. But you want them at the max side of that spec, so as they wear, even if they wear a little bit, they'll still be in spec. The reason you want the gaps right, because these bikes will be hard to start, and that's exactly what the issue with this bike was. It was hard to start, and as it heats up, these specs are all going to get tighter. When I was out riding and the bike was at temperature, it was hard to start, and that's why I went down this path. So I'm going to get the shims out of the bike, and then once I have the shims out of the bike, I'll measure what's in there, and then get the correct shims. You see the 2 white dots are lined up. It's screwed, takes a 6mm Allen wrench. Going to put a rag under here, because I get the feeling there's going to be some oil coming out. Alright, no oil. Here's the spacer. We're going to take that off. You can see that that bolt is pointed. Not sure if you can see that in there, but there's a little divot in the flywheels for that point to go into. You want to make sure it's in there. Let's put this back in. Now you don't really want to torque it at all. I am just going to snug it a hair. Now that that's snugged up, I'm going to double check it just by turning a little, and yes, it's locked. Now while I'm working on it, to make sure no dirt gets in, I'm just going to put the cap in loosely. Next thing I have to remove is the timing chain tensioner. To get this out, you have to loosen this screw first, and then you can remove this nut. I do not have an open-end boxed end wrench that size, so I'm going to end up having to use an adjustable wrench, which is something I normally don't like to do. As you see, that was a little loose. This takes a 5mm Allen wrench, so I have it quite a bit loose there. Alright, now that I have it broke loose, it's turning real easy. Okay, now I have it out. Dripping a little oil, so I'll move the rag over to here. Make getting this out a little easier. I'm going to loosen the radiator. I think I need to collapse the adjuster, so I'm going to take the cap off the end. I'm going to stick an Allen wrench up the hole. Now it's going to give it a push. Alright, I think that should be it. Okay, that's how you do it. That's how it goes across the floor. Okay, here comes the adjuster. The manual says to remove the caps to start from the outside and then to the inside. The spark plug out, I'm going to use a 9/16 deep socket and then a short 3-inch extension. Now that's on the spark plug, Okay, I think I can turn it with my fingers now, so I'm just going to use a screwdriver. And now, see if I can turn it with my fingers, and I can. Still a little snug, but not too bad. Okay. Now I'll just take and pop the socket off the extension. Like that. I'm going to use this magnet on a stick to get the socket out. And the same magnet to get the spark plug out. There it is. A little dark, like it's been running rich, probably from those intake valves hanging open. Thankfully I have a new one. Now I'm going to put a little pry on this spark plug tube to see if it comes out. Get it to pop out. I'm going to use the bolt right here and just make sure your tools are clean, and there it is. I know there's a couple O-rings down in there, and I did buy those O-rings. These bolts are 10 millimeter. I'm going to start from the outside and work my way in. Okay, I have the outside ones loose. Now I'm going to work on the inside. Want to take your timing chain guide off. Make sure your timing chain has plenty of slack. I like to get a nice big zip tie and zip tie the timing chain, so if it falls down in there, it'd be real easy to grab. But with a zip tie this big, it shouldn't fall down in. Now it should just be able to pop the cam cap off. You can see how easy that came off. And just a quick look at the journals, and you can see they're in excellent condition. And these are oil squirters. You want to blow through them with a little bit of brake clean or something to make sure they're open. Now you can take your cams out. I'm going to take the exhaust cam out first. You can see that the journals are both in great condition, and the lobes are too. No pitting, no wear, the hardness isn't coming off anything. It is imperative not to ding any of those surfaces. Now the intake cam. You can see how the chain doesn't fall down in. The intake cam has this plastic piece. And again, the journals are in excellent condition, and so are the lobes. Right here you have this follower. You lift that up. And on this one, right there, that's the shim. I'm going to get a magnet to take that shim out. Again, before you put any tools down in here, you want to make sure that they're clean, free from dirt. I can see it just pulled the shim. Get that up. There's the shim right on the end of the mag. I'm going to check the thickness on that shim. Write it down. I'm going to pull the other three and check them, and then I'll show you the numbers that I come up with. Checking this first shim, I get a micrometer. It's come down. And there it is there. Kind of has a little bit of a slip fit. I'm at the third mark. That's 75 thousandths plus 13. That makes it 88 thousandths of an inch. You can also use a vernier caliper to check it. And there you have it. 88 thousandths of an inch. Okay, so there's what I need. I checked them all. Left side front was good. I don't have to change that one, so I didn't even pull the shim out. The other exhaust on the right side was at 0.88. I'm going to get a 0.86 to bring me to 7 thousandths clearance on that one. On the intakes, I had a 0.90 or 90 thousandths. I was at 2, so I need one that's 4 thousandths smaller, and that'll be 0.086. And then on the right hand side, I was at 0.3. It had a 0.8, and to get the 6 thousandths, I have to come down another 3. So it's 0.085. They're the shims I need, and I'm going to go to the local shop and get those. Now that I have all the parts clean, I'm going to start reassembling. First thing I'm going to do is install the spark plug tube O-rings. One of them goes in the head right there, and then one of them goes in the upper cam block right there. Before I install any O-ring, I use Dow Corning number 55 O-ring lubricant Keeps the O-ring soft and pliable. Get that in, I just start it down in there. And it's that easy. And now the one in the head. Alright, that's easy. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some assembly lube on the journals where the cam rides. That way, if the oil takes a little bit of time to get up there, this will stop it from doing any damage. It's important to use assembly lube because it melts away. You don't want to use grease. Grease can actually starve it for oil because the grease will not go away. It'll stay there. Even if it gets hot, it stays there, and then it can carbon up. That's why assembly lube is so important. The other spot you want to put a little assembly lube is right where the cam lobes ride on these valve arms. It's important to put the shims in and not to forget that. So I'm going to put those in now. The left side front exhaust was fine at 7. The right side front exhaust was at 5 and I want it to be at 7. The shim that was in there was 88, so I need it to go down to 86. You can see with this veneer caliper, it's at 86 thousandths. Best way I found to get these in is with a magnet. Lift the arm up. Set it in where it goes and just slide it off and hold it with my finger. Make sure it's down. Next thing I'm going to do is the left side intake. The clearance was at 2 thousandths. The shim was at 90. And the new shim needs to be 86 thousandths. You can see that shim's at 86. I'm going to put that in. Lift it up. Put the shim in on the magnet. Hold it down with my finger. Make sure it's all the way in. And it is. Now I put the arm back down. Same with the last one. It was at 3 thousandths. I wanted it 6 thousandths. The shim was 88. The new shim I'm going to put in needs to be 85 thousandths. You can see that's right on 85 thousandths. I come in, lift the arm, come down. There it is in place. Okay, now I can install the cams. Want to make sure when you're installing the cams that your marks are facing each other. So I'm going to put this one in here like this. I'll just get it close right now, knowing that it'll probably need to be adjusted. This front cam looks right. This back cam's off quite a bit. Now, once you get them in, you think you have them close, you want to tighten the chain through the chain adjuster hole right here and just make sure that they don't rotate. I'm just going to go up in here with a screwdriver. Now to have a screwdriver up in there, the chain's tight and you can see they're right in time facing each other. It's important when you're doing this that this black plastic piece faces up and it goes and sits tight in this cutout for it. Now I'm going to install the upper cam plate. This has 4 dowels and it sits down on it real nice and easy, and it's all the way down. Next is the 8 upper plate bolts. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the threads to help them so when I torque them. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the threads to help them torque properly. And also put the upper timing chain guide on. And that goes right here like this. Now to tighten the bolts, you start from the 4 inside ones and work your way out. The manual says tighten the bolts to 14 Newton meters or 10.3 pound-feet of torque. Lubricate with engine oil, which is what I did. 10.3 pound-feet is 123.6 inch-pounds. I'm going to do that in steps. I'm going to start out with 50 inch-pounds and go all the way around. I just have the first two done, but I'm checking and the cams are still free. I think it's important to check early whether they're binding or not. You always want to go around as many times as it takes at that torque to make sure that those bolts are all at that torque. A lot of times if the first one you tighten, it'll torque and you'll think you'd be right, but when you go around to the rest, you'll come back to that one and it'll loosen. So you need to keep going around until they're all at the torque you're looking for. Now, 123 inch-pounds. Again, the cams are nice and free. Again, go around the second time. Want to check that everything's nice and free. That one is. That one is. Everything, the alignment marks are still aligned. Now that that's done, it's time to recheck your shimming and make sure everything's right. Next thing I'm going to install is the rubber O-ring. Next thing I'm going to install is the gasket on the top of a pushrod tube. I have a little O-ring grease on it, and it just slips right on there. Now you want to install the timing chain automatic adjuster. You can see right now it's all the way out. You just bring it all the way in, and there's about 1/4 of an inch right there that you don't collapse it. If you do collapse it that 1/4 of an inch, it comes all the way back out. Not a big deal. Right there. The way this is installed is this check ball faces away from the motor. The way the adjuster goes is you have the nut like this, the copper washer goes on, then this goes in here like this. You also have this cap after you're done. This cap has an O-ring on it. You install this entire thing, you tighten this up, you get a tool and you give it a push, and that allows this to come out. When you push it, it self-adjusts the timing chain. You can see I pushed it in not hard, but it already took the slack out of the timing chain. Now you get the nut on. Now you put the cover on. I'm going to go up in there with a Torx driver, and the reason I'm using a Torx driver is that the end won't damage that check ball. And you just give it a push and it releases that spring, and you'll hear it. And there it is. Now I'm going to put the cap on the end. It takes a 5mm Allen wrench. It's important this time that you want to rotate the engine 2 revolutions to make sure the timing marks stay correct. To do this, you have to take that bolt back out and put the spacer back on, and that allows the flywheels to spin. Here's the bolt, here's the spacer. I'm going to put it back on, and now I'll put it right back in. Okay, now I'm going to put this back in. I forgot to mention earlier that there was an O-ring up in there. So now I'm going to do a leak down check on this motorcycle. The first thing you have to do is screw this tube into the spark plug hole. And as you can see, I already have one in there. And then I'm going to use this ProMotion leak checker to check how much leak it has. You do need an air source to do this, and I have one here. Now to have an air source to it, you want to make sure your gauge is at 0%. And then the motor has to be locked at top dead center, and it is. Now you hook this on here. You can hear it's leaking. It's leaking at 10%. It's coming right up the engine, so that's past the rings. So this needs a piston and rings. That'll be my next step, to pull the head and the cylinder. This is a homemade leak down checker I made. I'm going to check it at 70 psi. This has a 40 thousandths orifice drilled in the outlet. You can see this one drops to 60. That's showing a little bit more than 10% leak, but I can hear it coming right past the rings. All right, so here we are. There's the piston and the ring. That's the oil ring. Here's the cylinder. Here's the head. I did spray some brake clean in each one of the ports for the valves, and I don't see anything leaking, but I will check them in more detail. And then the cylinder. Not sure how good that shows up, but there's still crosshatch all in that cylinder. Does have like a little bit of a buff right there. Still see the crosshatch. And the same thing on the other side, which is this is the intake side. But again, you can still see the crosshatch even where that is. And then the piston skirts look like this. Looks like there's scratches there, but there's not. I can't feel it with my fingernail or anything like that. This one's more just got a shine to it. I guess that's why I had to leak that and the rings. I'll be putting a new piston in it. Now I got to check the bore to make sure that piston's going to fit. If not, I'm going to have to send it out and have it re-nickel coated. Okay, this piston's a little over 3 inches, so I got a mic that goes from 3 to 4 inches. You always want a mic at the skirt. That's going to be the widest part of the piston. So this one mic's at 3 inch 068. The new Wiseco piston has some kind of skirt coating. The new Wiseco piston measures 3.068 and a half. So it's about a 1/2 thousandths bigger, and that could account for some of the wear on the piston. So we're going to say that piston's worn a 1/2 thousandths. I still will double check what it's supposed to be in the manual before I move forward. So the Wiseco box, it says the bore should be 3.070 with an 8. So almost 371. It says that the clearance should be 1 6/10 thousandths. So that's what the Wiseco piston is saying the bore should be. Now you subtract what the clearance should be. And that gives you what the piston would be. 3.069. I said I was at 3.068 and a half. I'm sure that's me miking. I have it pretty tight on the piston and everything's really cold out here. So I'll check the bore next. I have my mic set at 3.071. Now to calibrate the dial bore gauge, I put it in here. There it is, perfect, 0. So I know when I get to 0 on the gauge, while I'm checking the bore, I'll be at 3.071. Now Wiseco says that the bore should be 3.070 and 8/10 thousandths. You can see right there, each one of those lines is a 1/2 thousand, maybe a 1/4 thousandths wear. And I'm going to check in 3 places. Not quite a 1/4 thousandths wear. Check it up here at the top. No wear at all there. Now I'll turn the cylinder 90 degrees and check it again. No wear there. And nowhere there. And that's pretty much what I'd expect to see. In line with the wrist pin really doesn't see the wear. It's the front and back as the piston rocks. And it has a little bit of wear, but barely a 1/4 thousandths. I still see good crosshatch. It has the nickel coating. You don't have to re-hone them. All right, there you have it. So I don't really see much wear at all. Maybe a 1/4 thousandths. So I'm pretty confident that I can see crosshatch. I don't have any scratches. It's within spec of the piston, but I'm confident that the piston's the right size, the cylinder's in great shape, and that there's nothing I can see that's wrong. Before you can pull the head and cylinder, you have to get the antifreeze out. I take the cap off. Then I take this bolt out. And then the antifreeze came out. In order to get the head and the cylinder off, you have to take the exhaust pipe off. And I can't get it out without removing the shock. So I'm going to take the shock bolt out, try and move the shock over, and hopefully it slips right out. In this video, I'm not showing you every detail on how to get this bike apart, because there's a lot of videos out there to do. But I do want to show you the technical side of things and what's important to check and how to check them. The way I got it out was I loosened the lower shock bolt, and that got me enough room to get it out. I have to say it's probably not going to be real fun to get back in. It was pretty tight even then. Okay, now I should be able to get the head off this. Okay, I just had to take this radiator out of the way a little bit. It was hitting the fan. I loosened the upper hose and took it off. I'm going to leave the bottom two on. Okay, got the head and the cylinder off and the piston. I want to tell you, it wasn't fun even a little bit. I ended up having to rock the engine over, which means the swing arm had to come out of it. You can see the tires leaning. Just want to point out that the air cleaner is plenty clean. It's just one of these nets that's discolored on the outside of it. Probably time for a new one. There's the engine parts. I'll take a closer look at them. I guess you'd say that's what winning somewhat looks like. Didn't feel like it. No sense videoing any of that because it wasn't interesting in the least little bit. Alrighty, got all the valves, valve springs, and seals out of the head. Everything looks pretty good on the valve seat side of things. I am going to check that further, and I'll show you how I do that. Over here, everything looks great. The one thing I did notice is there is a ton of carbon on the back side of the intake valves. To me, I'm thinking valve seals are leaking, or it's just the deposits from the gas with the ethanol. Not really sure which that is, but anyway, when you take these out, you want to make sure that you keep them associated with the proper valve space that they went into, or the guide, so that when you go back, if you already had it shimmed, you can just reuse your shims in the same spot and you don't have to refigure it out. The exhaust valves were pretty clean. I was surprised. There's just a little bit on the back of them, but nothing more than what I would expect. So we'll get all this cleaned up and then we'll see what things look like. One of the things I do when I take everything apart is I take all the components from each valve and keep them together. So these springs and valve and everything is from the intake right side. And I just keep doing that, intake left side, etc. This stuff's all been cleaned. One of the things I like to do while I'm here is, even though I wasn't having a valve issue, is I like to make sure they're straight. And the best way to do that is to chuck them up in a drill of whatever kind you have. These aren't bent, so that's good. Now I've already checked all these and they're all good. Next thing I'm going to do is take a little fine grinding compound and lap all the valves, just to make sure that the valves look good and the seats all look good. Now I can clearly see everything looks good, but it is a good idea just to do this, and I do it every time. The best way to go about it is do a little layout fluid on everything. That way when you cut them, you can see clearly where everything's hitting. Now you can see everything's really clean. I just stuck everything in a solvent tank and cleaned it real good, and then I always spray everything down with a little WD-40, just so if there's anything that's going to rust that it doesn't. But the other thing you can always use is oven cleaner. That works well. So before I put the dye on, just take a little brake clean and wipe the WD-40 off of the seats, and then do the same with the valve. And then I just take the layout dye and give it a real light coat. Now I'll coat the rest of the valves. So I have the valves and the seat all coated and it's dry now. You want to make sure that when you lap the valves, you lap it to the spot that it went in on the head. Flipped upside down, it goes in here. I don't want to use a lot of lapping compound, so you can see I just have a little here, and you can see there I don't have very much on there. Now I stick it into that spot. I have this tool for lapping valves. I wet the suction cup a little bit. Want to give it a little turn, and that's it. Now I take it out, and you have to get the lapping compound off of it, and then you'll have a gray line right where it lapped. Now, I'm not sure how good that shows up on camera, but that line has to be consistent the entire way around the valve. If it's not consistent around the valve, then the valve's not going to seat all the way. It's very consistent around the valve. So the valve's fine, and I don't really see wear on the valve. I've taken these titanium valves out in the past and seen a lot of wear on them. And now you just want to check the seat, and you want to make sure that where that gray line is on the seat is consistent all the way around, the same thickness. It's not missing spots, and that's about as good as you're going to see one unless you just had the valves and seats cut. It's very important to get all the lapping compound off. After I do all these valves, I'll take brake clean and make sure to clean this all real good. Now I'm going to do the rest of them, and I'll show you the seats when I'm finished. I lapped all 4 valves in, and the seats look perfect. They're even width all the way around. They're hitting in the right spot on the seats, pretty much the middle of the seat. You can see there's still a red section of seat above it and some below it. So I'm really happy with that. The valves were the same way. They all look great. One of the other things you want to do is make sure your cylinder head is flat, and also your cylinder. It's allowed to be up to 3 thousandths and 9 10,000ths. We could call that 4 thousandths. The way I do that is you want to take something that you know is a really good straight edge and just get a set of feeler gauges. The smallest feeler gauge is 1.5 thousandths, and you just put your straight edge on there, and then you try to get under it. You want to make sure you check all the surfaces, and you check in a lot of spots. You just don't want to do like 1 or 2 checks and then not go any further than that. And no matter what, this 1.5 thousandths isn't even going under that straight edge. So this is plenty flat, and then I'll check the cylinder head when I get to it. Before I go any further, I'm going to take some brake clean and brake clean everything down real good. Even though everything was put into the solvent tank and washed really good, and then I blew it dry with high pressure air, I still like to use some brake clean and make sure all the dirt's off of it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this veneer caliper and measure the height of the spring. In the manual, they call out the specs for the valve springs: minimum length outer intake valve, minimum length inner intake valve, minimum length outlet valve. So that's the exhaust. See right here, the minimum on the exhaust valve is 1.591 or 590. These veneer calipers, this is a really good set, Starrett, but they sell these really cheap. The cheap ones are very inexpensive and would be fine for measuring this stuff. I take it where it's longer than the spring, go right down through the center. So at 1.631, that's certainly longer than 1.590. I'm going to check all the rest off camera. So I decided to go with the Tusk gasket set. The part number for my KTM is 103-202-0216. I hope I don't regret using these gaskets, but I've always had good luck with them, so I'm going to use them in this case too. One of the really important things you have to do when you're messing with these heads, you have to make sure that these oil squirters are clear. I did flush brake clean through them and then blew them out with high pressure air real good and made sure that I could feel the air coming through them. It's very important, and they have very small orifice holes, so it's real easy for those to get clogged, and that would damage your cam if it is that they're not working. So it's really important that you do that. First thing I'm going to do is put the valve seals on. Here's the 4 seals. First thing I do is get a socket that fits the valve guide seal really good. This is a Craftsman 9mm with a 6-point. Next thing I do is I get a really long extension. The longer extension helps me to make sure I'm staying straight, because if you're off a little bit way back here, you can really see it. And then I always use a little hammer. I don't want anything big because these don't take a lot of force to put on. Now what I do is I oil the seals up before I even start. So they got a good coat of oil where they slip onto the guide, and the lip has a good coat of oil. So you can see I have a good coat of oil all over it. Then I get one of the valves that I'm doing. In this case, it's an exhaust, and it's the right side exhaust. I put a nice coat of oil on the valve stem. This is the right side exhaust. I just slip that valve right up in there. Now that the valve is up in here, that helps guide it on also. And I put it down onto the exhaust valve and just kind of give it a little wiggle. And this helps hold it straight. And now I just tap it on. When I look down in here at that, it looks like it's all the way down to me. And you could kind of hear it change pitch when I was tapping it on. And that's all the way down, and it's just that easy. You don't want to complicate this. Now I'm going to put the lower spring retainer on. And it just slips right over that with no problem. And you can see these are cone shaped. So the fat part goes down, and that cone shape allows the upper retainer to sit into it right. This is a cheapy valve spring compressor that I bought off of eBay. Works really well, so I'm happy with it. I don't even think it was $50. So on the bottom, you want to make sure it's centered in the valve the best you can. Like that. On the top, you make sure the upper retainer is centered on the valve spring and it's in the cup. Then I just take a small screwdriver in the handle and turn it in. You just need to turn it in enough to get the locks in it. You don't want to go down so far that you crush your brand new seal. So I think they'll fit in there. It's the valve stem's just above the keepers, and I just have a little bit of oil on those. A lot of times I use needle nose pliers and or a magnet with this, or my needle nose pliers are magnetic now. Okay, it's set down in there real nice and easy. So I'm going to loosen this up, let it put it in the right spot, or get closer to the right spot. I'm sure at this point you're looking at nothing but thumbs. Now I'm going to back it off. And as you back it off, you just want to make sure that they stay where they belong. And it doesn't look like they are, so I'm going to go back down a little bit more. Okay, now they definitely dropped in where they should be now that I'm coming out. So now that's how you get the seal and the valve springs back in. I'll do the rest of these off camera now. There you have it. I have all the springs in, all the keepers, and of course all the valves. One thing I didn't mention, you should always put the lower valve spring retainer in first before you put the seal on, just in case it doesn't fit over top of the seal. When doing this, I made sure to oil up the valve stems real good, oil up the seals real good so that they slip over the valve stem, stuff like that. You can never have enough lubrication or assembly lube on everything. In this case, I just used a thick motor oil. That way when you start it, it's not running dry. Next thing I'm going to do is put these arms in, and this is what the cam rides on and what pushes the valve. And this is what the cam rides on and what pushes the valve down. Again, I'm going to keep these all in their original spot. Everything's been cleaned. These are pretty simple to put in. You want to inspect your rod real good. You also want to mic where these arms ride on the rod and make sure that surface isn't worn. But the way to check them is, the book does call out what the specs on these are, but you don't necessarily need it. Just get on a section where the arms don't ride and mic that section. And this is at 295. Then get on the section where the arms do ride. You can see it's rated 295. So you can go up and down this shaft and just make sure everything's at 0.295. And it is. So this shaft's good. You can either use a vernier caliper like I just did or a micrometer for that. This one was in the intake right hand side. This is the way the head goes into the motorcycle. This arm would go here, but you have to do both arms at the same time. So I need to do both intake arms. I'm just going to set that one there like that. You can see this one's marked in left. So this is the other one. Now before I assemble all this, again, I'll just take some oil. Make sure to get plenty of it down in there. I'll also oil the shaft real good. And now I'll insert the shaft. And as I go through, I'm going to go through that arm. Like that. Now I'll take the next arm. Make sure it has plenty of oil. And bring the shaft in further. Right through the arm. And it's just that simple. Now the other thing I'll make sure to do is I'm going to make sure to put some assembly lube on the top of these valve stems, and then I'll put assembly lube here on these arms where the cam lobes ride. Also assembly lube where the cam journals are to make sure everything has plenty of lube so nothing's dry when I'm starting the motorcycle. Now if they're in, it takes this cap and it takes an O-ring. I got two brand new KTM O-rings for these caps, and that part number is 77009000157. On these O-rings, it is possible you could use your old ones, but I like new ones. I don't need oil leaks. So before I put the new one in, I'm going to use some Parker O-ring lubricant. This just keeps the O-rings nice and soft. It swells them ever so slightly to make sure they make a good seal. I just put the O-ring on there like that, and then I'll just screw it in. I'll do the other one off camera. Now I'll do the exhaust shaft and the arms, and I'll do that off camera. Alright, now I'm going to put some assembly paste on where I was talking about the end of the valve stems and on both sides of those arms. I've always used this Redline synthetic assembly paste, and I've always done very well with it. I've never had an issue. If you don't have this, you can always use motor oil, but use a good quality motor oil. So I'm just going to lift up these arms. As you can see, they're nice and free. And then I'm just going to put a dab on each one. Now the cams come across here and the lobes ride on the top of these arms. So again, just going to put a dab on top of the arms where the cams ride. Want to make sure when you're doing this work that these arms don't have some kind of abnormal wear on them. They seem like they have some kind of special coating on them. Mine didn't have any wear at all. So that's what that looks like. Now I'm going to put some in where the cams sit in the journals. You cannot use grease for this. Grease will not melt out, so it's not what you want to use. I need to put my shims in before I go any further, and the intake on the right hand side needs a 0.85, and I just put that shim on at 0.085. These two need an 86 thousandths shims, or 0.086, and there it is. It comes to the third line. That's 75 thousandths plus 11 makes it 86 thousandths. Now I just take and put that shim on there like that. Now that I have the shims in, I put a little assembly lube on top of the shims also. I'm not going to put the plastic piece back in here for the breather, because I'm going to have to pull all this back out in order to get the cam chain on. So this is just to check the shimming. Want to make sure the timing marks are loosely pointed at each other. You can see neither one of these cams are trying to push the valves open. That's how you know you're at top dead center on the compression stroke. Now I'll put the upper cam block back on and bolt this down. And even though this is temporary, I am going to torque it to the right spec. I'll do that off camera. Even though this is just a temporary install to check the valve lash, because I'm going to torque it, you still want to put oil on the threads of the bolt and oil underneath the head of the bolt here. That helps you get a truer torque. Alright, so where are we at with this? I have the top of the engine back together. I just have to put the valve cover on it and get the engine back in the chassis. Also, while it was apart, I decided to check the bearings in the swing arm, and although they aren't bad, one is a little bit questionable. This is the inner race to the bearings, and this one is the one, it's kind of questionable. You can feel that a little bit, and you can even feel it with your fingernail. And the one that always gets worn, and the one that this is one swing arm bearing that's right at the sprocket, which takes the most abuse because the chain's pulling on it. That begs the question of, if the swing arm bearings are bad, why wouldn't you do the link bearings at the same time? So now I'm doing that. And this is like any other project I do. Starts out as a simple valve shimming adjustment, and next thing you know, I'm doing a full top end rebuild and a full suspension rebuild. So I have the bearings coming for the swing arm. The bearing kit for the triple link has lower shock bearing in it, and I also ordered an upper shock bearing. So once they get in, I'll replace those. Again, this is not what this video is about, so I'm just going to take care of that stuff while I have it off. And there's plenty of videos on YouTube that show how to do this, so there's no need me showing it again. So there it is, the pile of bearings from the link and the swing arm. You can see they're all out of there. And would you believe, even buying them aftermarket, that's still $150 worth of parts right there. Or if you buy them from KTM, they're right around 300 bucks. So now to go order the kit. Well, there you have it. All new link bearings, all new swing arm bearings, and new upper shock bearing. Lower shock bearings, this one down here. So all the bearings in the suspension completely replaced, and it's not cheap. Anyway, had to be done. Whatever you do, don't forget to grease everything and put plenty of it on. I used the grease that came with Pivot Works bearings. It says waterproof high load bearing grease. I'm sure any good synthetic bearing grease will do. I got all the work done. It's finally time to start this thing. Come over here, and it starts right up. Now I'm going to give it a heat cycle, and after a couple heat cycles, then I will take it out for a small ride, dump the oil, and put fresh oil in it. Right now it's about 44 degrees out. It started up really nice. Motor sounds good to me. Wow. Actually started easier than I thought it would. Over here sounds nice. Engine sounds good over here. There it is, 100% finish and ready to go for the 24 season. And hopefully another 204 hours. Let's see, it's a little warmer today. It hasn't been started. I just pushed in the cold start button on the fuel injection, and this is how it should start. And there you go. I can't wait to ride it. I appreciate everybody watching this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you.